Hello and welcome to another MarketMuse content strategy webinar in our series. My name is Jeff Coyle. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer for MarketMuse. And today's discussion is going to be really exciting, and we got an amazing guest host today. It's going to be titled "How to and Why You Should Optimize Your Brand SERP," and we're going to get into brand versus branded. We're going to get into why this is so important. We're going to get into knowledge panels, why they're different, why they're the same as GMB, everything under the sun that relates to brand SERPs. And we've got the Mr. Brand SERP person to discuss this with us. All right, housekeeping. Please ask us anything or almost anything in the chat. It's usually on the right side of your screen. Type it in there and we will get to them in line if they're relevant to our discussion, or join us on the AMA in the Content Strategy Collective Slack channel. And we can get any specifics. If you want to paste yours knowledge panel in, if you want to ask how you might do it for yourself, or tell some war stories or ask questions of our guest, do that in the Slack channel after this with the AMA. All right, also the recording will be available in the next few days. While you're at it, go download one of our almost 100 content strategy webinars from people like Andy Crestodina, Pam Didner, and Kevin Indig. It's really just a treasure trove of great content strategy tips and advice. All right, that's all of our housekeeping. I'm going to introduce our guest today, Jason Barnard. He's the founder and CEO of Calicube. He's also the person if you need any information about brand SERPs. Thank you for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure, Jeff. I'm really happy to be here. Anybody who wants to talk to me about brand SERPs, and I love share your war stories. I've got loads of war stories, and the more I collect, the more I learn. War stories are possibly the best source of information for me.
Oh yeah, I had a webinar with Eli Schwartz a couple of weeks ago, or it seemed like a couple of weeks ago, and the thing that I most treasure speaking with him is just every one of his enterprise SEO stories, because just politics, dynamics, getting stuff done in silos. But can you tell us a little bit about Calicube and kind of your background and how you got started in thinking about brand SERPs as a mission?
Well, I mean, I won't tell you my whole story because that's very long, but Calicube, I actually created it 4 years ago and built an entire platform for optimizing brand SERPs and triggering knowledge panels. And nobody was interested, absolutely nobody. I mean, it was a completely pointless exercise and it took me 6 months. So I put it in the fridge, and it's been sitting in the fridge for the last 4 years, and now people are interested, which is wonderful. So I've got it out of the fridge, and my weekends basically spent rewriting the code that I wrote 4 years ago and updating it with all the stuff I've learned since then. I mean, my obsession, it's complete obsession, is I want to understand how we can manage what appears when somebody Googles your exact match brand name, that's your brand SERP, and how we can trigger knowledge panels for brands and people and other entities, in fact, products, music groups, podcasts, the list goes on, and how we can control it, how we can influence it, and how we can correct it. And we talked about rabbit holes earlier on. When I started doing this work 7 years ago, I was doing my own brand SERP because some guy in the UK had driven down the motorway at 157 miles an hour, and that was ranking for my name. And the other problem was that I used to be a blue dog in a cartoon. And when I talked to clients and I said, oh, we're going to do this wonderful work together, I would walk out of the meeting, they would be going, yeah, great, we're going to work with Jace, that's wonderful. And then they would then Google my name, and it would say Jason Barnard is a blue dog in a cartoon. And all my credibility went straight out the window. So I had to correct that and make sure that it showed me as a digital marketing expert. And it took me 2 months to actually get some kind of traction. And I thought, I'm a good SEO, I will do this in 2 months and I can put it to one side, forget about it, and never do it again. And 7 years later, I'm still digging down that rabbit hole, and every single day I'm learning something new. I've got a database of 70,000 brands with 10 million brand SERPs, and I dig through it in a spare moment and think, wow, I didn't know that. And it's mad, and I get over enthusiastic. So during this conversation, if I get too enthusiastic, please do tell me to calm down.
No, I love the example that you had somebody with your name kind of do something completely wild that you would never want associated with yours. And we have the one question I always like for differentiation on brand match. You touched on it, or brand SERP, is that you're talking about exact match query, SERP. And so how do you often, do you get a lot of folks who are confusing branded SERPs, variants, different intent profiles with exact match? What types of things do you say to make sure people know the difference?
Well, it's really difficult. It's very, very interesting that as soon as I say brand SERPs, almost everybody starts going off onto all the different variants, brand name plus reviews, brand name versus so-and-so, brand name alternatives, and so on. And I'm saying, I'm not interested in that. Or I am interested, but I'm not. I'm trying to avoid getting involved in it because it would just explode my brain. It's already difficult enough as it is. And everyone says to me, but what you're doing is so simple, so obvious, and it really doesn't fly very high. And you're saying, but you're wrong. And your problem is you think of the exact match brand SERP, you think I'm ranking #1, I've managed that, we can move on to something else. And that's only the beginning of the story. And it's very difficult to convince people to stop. Well, obviously, it's none of my business if they want to go and talk about branded SERPs and talk about different. But I'm saying if I focus on just this, I can draw so much value out of it, and we can actually, together as a community, I want to share this knowledge, understand how much this really does mean. And I think it means much, much, much more to marketers than they actually realize today. Yeah. So I have literal fist fights with people to stop talking about branded SERPs.
Exactly. That's why I put the slide in here, so like the fist fights can begin. But no, really. So what are the things that are what are things that are so important about brand SERP? And by the way, I share that both are extraordinarily important, but they're wildly different. The way that they work are wildly different. The way that as you're going to probably discuss, which is the relationships, the entity, that you are recognized as a brand, that there are other brands that need to be differentiated with your brand that might be, regionally differentiated with local. They might be, like you mentioned, the person in this one part of the world who is speeding, et cetera, that might not be triggering universally. So why is it so important to own your brand SERP and not just own it, but like understand everything that's on it, what you can influence and what you can't?
That's a delightful question. It's controlling your brand SERP. If you control your brand SERP, you control your brand message to anybody who's Googling your brand name. And anybody who's Googling your brand name is a phenomenally important part of your business. They're the top people you want to really convince. They're prospects who are about to convert, bottom of funnel people. They're existing clients, they're journalists, they're potential hires, they're all of these people who are potentially very important to your business or very important to your business. And control is the fundamentally most important thing. The quality is great, but if you've got control, you can create quality. If you don't have control, you cannot create quality. And you touched on the idea of geolocation. Now, brand names, because of copywriting, trademark, and company house rules, whatever it would be, within individual regions, there will tend to be relative non-ambiguity between brand names. But for people, it's completely different.
Right.
And so for a brand, you have this regionalization, and for people, you also have this regionalization, but the regionalization is based on Google's understanding of who is likely to be the most relevant, probabilistic person you're looking for in that particular region. And that's a whole rabbit hole. As soon as you start going down that, it goes completely nuts. I invite anybody who's interested to look up Mary Moore in Australia, the UK, US, France, or Canada. And you will see that not only do you get different Mary Moores across the world, but a different number of them, different presentations of them, they're different people. And that's the name I've found that has the most variety across the world for some obscure reason. And for brands, though, you have much more stability and it's much easier to control. So people is one big bag of fish rabbit hole thing, and brands are another rabbit hole bag of fish thing. And I am realizing more and more that I need to separate them, and I find it very difficult because both are incredibly interesting.
Yeah, and some people, their personal brand is very important, and it's often, synonymous or similar to their business. Maybe at one point in their career, especially in the search and marketing space, you have a lot of personal brands who also own a core brand that they know. So it's really, do you manage your brand SERP for every entity that you own or that you desire to own? Is that the approach that you think about? Or like if I have product lines, if I have explicit product names,
Yeah. Well,
I'm trying to basically build an entity inventory for myself
yes.
or my company.
No, I mean, you've absolutely nailed it. I call them brand SERPs because people can get their head around that, but it's
Right.
actually entity SERP, and it can be anything. It can be a music album, a music group, a podcast, an event, a person, a brand, a product, anything that's an entity.
Right.
You need to, if it's important to you as a brand, so we're going to talk about companies and people, you need to control it so that you can make sure it's qualitative. It's accurate, positive, and convincing, which is my favorite triplet to say. But yeah, it's entity SERPs. And entity SERPs, I mean, what we're seeing now with entity-based search is that it's coming in more and more and more in terms of not only the results that appear in the blue links, but the rich elements, the SERP features that appear, and the related entities that we're seeing, which are the incredibly obvious, visible version of this entity relationship that Google's seeing in its brain, let's say. But it goes much beyond that. I mean, a really, really nice example that I quite like, I mean, is people also ask.
Mm-hmm.
I study these brand SERPs. I've got 10 million of them in my database. 33% of brands have got people also ask. Now, that implies that Google has understood who they are and what their core business is, who their audience is, because it could not identify the questions if it didn't have some level of understanding of who they are, because the questions are about the brand and around the brand or the brand's core topics. Yep. So that's kind of, for me, the implicit understanding of the entity, which isn't as obvious as the knowledge panel or the related entities people also search for underneath the knowledge panel or the entity boxes at the bottom.
Nice. Yes, those are great observations. The related unit, that the SERP. Oh, by the way, we had a question come in. What is a SERP? Search engine results page. Sometimes we say weird acronyms. PAA. People also ask. Is the typically the box at the bottom of a search results page. One feature is a related searches box, which you can still see. And I think that's where I think why Kalicube will grow steam. It's people are really worried about search engine results page features or SERP features now, because there's so many of them. There's topic cards, there's selection sliders, there's weather, there's there's quotations, there's custom for travel. It's not stopping. Google's quest to give us the answer immediately is right in front of our face every time we see a SERP feature, or the brand search. But one thing I will say, which this is worth hopefully the price of admission for most, Jason, you mentioned some rabbit holes, but click on your PAA responses. Click on those people also ask, and it will add some additional questions. But depending on what you click on, which one you click on, those questions are different. So if you want to go down a rabbit hole, try to figure out why. Why does your clicking on one particular question change the intent of the additional expanders? And the reason is because Google's associating it with the question against the original query, against entities. And so it's validating everything you say. You've got to know why those things are happening to be able to control convincingly. So.
And if we come back a step to brand SERPs, I call them your Google business card. It's the result that your audience sees, what your audience sees when they Google your brand name. And that's really important because it puts in your mind that this is your business card. It's the message to your audience that Google is projecting that you have to control. And the people also ask is a very interesting case, because in my super duper database of 10 million brand SERPs, there are 33% of brands who have these on their brand SERP, and 9% have any sort of control, i.e. they provide any of the results.
Right.
So brands are not answering questions about themselves.
Exactly right.
And
Yes.
that's completely insane. And now I'm going to scare you. And this is a scary rabbit hole. I
Right.
wrote an article for Search Engine Land because I suddenly, in October, the people also asked moved into the knowledge panel.
Right.
I'm calling them entity statements because they're not questions. They're statements like, how much does it cost? What is the mission statement? Who is the CEO? And there, you've got exactly the same problem. It's
Right.
not even 9% are answering them. So you have this knowledge panel, which is Google saying this is fact.
Right.
And the brands are having no possible control over it simply because they're not answering their own questions.
Exactly. Or they don't know what a knowledge panel is generally. So I think the most common mistake or the most common failure to differentiate is, hey, this is just about local and Google My Business.
Right.
And so what do you typically see with that kind of confusion? How do you make sure people can differentiate? Because, you know, your Google My Business, you can put posts, you can control the imagery, you can control an image sequence that's on your right rail. You can control, you know, if you have a map drop, if you actually have a map box as well as your right rail in control with your GMB. So, you know, how do you get people over that this isn't just about local, or that it's actually a combination of knowledge panel and local?
Well, the Google My Business is not knowledge. It's a business listing. It's like Yellow Pages or whatever you would call it in the US. It's basically you giving Google information that it then displays, but it's business provided information like posts and telephone number and website and so on and so forth. You control it, which is great. The knowledge panel is a machine understanding that humans do not control.
Right.
So this is the machine understanding who you are, what you do, and who your audience is, whereas Google My Business is you expressing to Google and to Google's users who you are, what you do, and who your audience is. And that's fundamentally different because one you can edit, the other you can't. One, Google employees can edit. The other, they can edit parts of the knowledge panel.
Right.
But even if they edit it, the machine will switch it back if the machine thinks they're wrong. The machine has control. It's the machine's understanding, and that's where we're going, and that's scary. If you don't know what you're doing, I find it super exciting. And the Google My Business question, I did a webinar this morning with Aleda Solis, and I mentioned it in passing, and I was saying, to brands for this year, one of the most important things you need to do, because you can separate rich elements, SERP features, into the local near me ones, which is Google My Business, basically, the entity-based ones, which is people also ask potentially, the knowledge panel, entity boxes, things where Google needs to understand who you are and what you do, and then the content ones, people also ask kind of is a between the two, video boxes, image boxes. And the Google My Business one is incredibly interesting because some companies say, well, I'm a national or an international company, I don't care. You're wrong.
Totally wrong.
Simply because somebody who searches your brand name near your company offices will see that Google My Business, number one. Number two is it's a means for you to inform Google who you are, what you're doing, who your audience is. And that's always good to take. And if you misrepresent your company in your Google My Business, because even if you're an international company, you have one of these, or you have multiple ones, a national business, same thing. If you misrepresent yourself into Google's brain, I mean, it's injected into its brain. It's looking at one thing and saying, I've understood this, but they're saying this. Never confuse a machine. Machines are not good at being confused. And I like to give the idea, it's like educating a child. If you give this machine contradictory information, it will never get to grips with who you are, what you do, and who your audience is. And if you give it corroborative information that is consistent across the board from multiple independent trusted sources, like a child, it will understand, it will learn. Right. And it's as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the money, and that's really the origin of authority in the search engines as well. It's building that, not getting in too much detail, but building that authoritativeness matrix of understanding, is this site, is this part of the site, is this section of the site, do they have authority? Do they have, is it clear that they are experts? And such that I should trust them. Well, if you get corroborating information that can influence these listings, well, you start to be able to drive the bus for yourself. No, I think that that's really awesome. Great way to describe it.
And we're talking here about just simple information. What's your phone number? What's the good phone number? And that's an interesting example. What's the good phone number in the UK versus the US? It will be different in the two different knowledge panels in the two different countries. Google often gets it wrong. And you think, oh, how stupid is Google? And the answer is, oh, I'm sorry, really sorry. It's not Google. It's you. You're not clear. You're not making it clear. And the idea that you need to have this information corroborated, the idea of corroboration must imply that there is an original source, and that original source has to be you.
Right. Yeah, you don't want it to be a review site who's not going to update it or something to that of that nature, right?
And Google's looking for that original source. Google wants you to tell it what you're all about, and it doesn't have any reason not to believe you, but it will only truly believe you if you can corroborate through these independent trusted sources. So the art of this whole thing is to say my website or one page on my website is the home for this entity, and I'm obsessed by that idea. Every entity needs a home. Google needs to know where that home is. It goes to that page, and I say page and not website. You need to find the page that represents the entity, describe the entity clearly to Google, and then point to all the corroborative information, and Google will believe you, and Google will represent you as you want to be represented, as long as the way you want to be represented is truthful and factual.
That's the tweet that should be happening right now in the next few minutes, is every entity needs a home. I love that. we need some sort of shirt for that one. I love it. So no, but what that ties to is the common misconception on Google My Business often ties to thinking that's the only way you have control. But what other ways is knowledge panel data found? So what, for someone who's just getting into this and just wanting to get focused on it, what are the ways that you can influence? What is that kind of method for getting that data planted firmly in place such that then Google can learn from it?
Well, step number one has to be that page on your website, about us, about me. It's a page that says clearly who you are, what you do, and who your audience is in a factual manner. And I was talking to Joost de Valk about that, and I was saying you don't want it to be your homepage. Your homepage already represents your website, potentially your products, potentially your products, sorry, your company, potentially it's a web page. It represents multiple things. You want one page that represents your entity, which is for a company about us, for a person about the employee. And the problem is, or the interesting thing is, that on that page you can be factual. If I force you to be factual about your entity on your homepage, you're going to bore the pants off your audience. So you don't want that kind of conflict. And the second thing, basically, so you need to identify where the home is. You need to express clearly who you are and what you do. Step number two is Google My Business for a company. And Andrea Volpini from WordLift has done loads of research into this, and he's worked a lot on it. And he's basically demonstrated that this is one of the stepping stones towards the knowledge graph. Those two together will not trigger a knowledge panel. It won't make your company, your brand understood by Google. You then need to go further, and people immediately say, oh, I want a Wikipedia page. Don't do it. Unless you are a notable company where somebody else has the super idea to create a Wikipedia page for you because you are truly notable and they really care, you're going to A, spend a lot of time trying to convince everybody that this is worth it, B, annoy an awful lot of Wikipedia editors, and C, the page will be deleted. I've got multiple examples. 20 minutes is the record for being deleted. 2 weeks is a decent, I mean, if you last 2 weeks, that's pretty good going, but 2 weeks is worthless in the bigger picture. And it also sends a negative message to Google. Google sees the page and it sees that it's been deleted by human beings because it's rubbish. So that's a really bad idea. Wikidata, next step down, they have a less high measure of notability.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be less notable but still in there, but you still need a certain level of notability, and you need to prove that notability. You can't just put any old rubbish in there because they don't want to clog it up with everybody. And that brings me on to the point that Google actually doesn't have, for its knowledge graph, a notability measurement. It doesn't care if you're notable, it just wants to understand. So Wikipedia has a high level of notability. People have to want to search for you spontaneously. Wikidata slightly lower. People have to be in some way interested in you, and it has to be useful for the wiki community in some way or another. Next level down is everybody else.
Right.
And everybody else is the majority of the world, most brands, most people. So we're all sitting around there, and that's all about, once I said, you know, you've got your home and the corroboration. The corroboration doesn't need to be wiki. It can be simply relevant, trusted sources within your industry and within your geolocation. And on Kalicube.pro, I've actually got a free tool where you can look at what the trusted sources appear to be within your industry. Obviously, we don't have the facts, but I've got a good guess which they are within industry, and you can dig down by country. And then the Kalicube Pro platform that I'm currently building out, that I've got out of the fridge 3 or 4 weeks ago, actually digs down into your brand. It analyzes what Google is looking at through your brand, even before you get that knowledge panel. So the idea is to say, you can look at what Google's looking at. We don't know if it trusts it yet, but it's certainly looking at it and definitely paying attention to this. Within your industry, it's paying attention to this, and it appears to trust it. That's where we focus. That's what you need to make happen for you in that corroborative, consistent manner that you point to, you signpost from your entity home, and you now have gone right around the whole story. You now think, my entity needs a home.
Yeah, right on. And a couple things just to unpack that that you said that I like to point out just for everybody's sake is, you know, each major Google database and kind of work unit has their own metric for authoritativeness.
Yeah.
So Google's core search has its own authoritativeness calculation and matrixing. News has its own rules and regulations. Knowledge panel and everything that relates to that. Google My Business, completely different kind of methodologies and structures. So just take that into account when you're assessing. Don't try to merge all those things together into one bucket, because you'll drive yourself insane and it's not right. But that, just take that into account. The other one,
Sorry, just to interrupt there, I think kind of 100%, absolutely 100%, we have to make our best efforts because we don't really know. And from my point of view, from Kalicube Pro's point of view, I've got 500 active experiments going on with WordLift to build knowledge graph presence, and we've had enormous success with, I mean, we can talk about it in a minute, with yellow koalas and blue dogs. And the second thing is, I've got 10 million brand SERPs, 10 million or so, actually might be 12 million lines of the knowledge panel API, and 77,000 brands. So although I don't know, I can definitely make a much better guess than you can.
Absolutely. No, that.
Sorry, not you personally, Jeff. Sorry.
No. I understand too. I mean, yeah, and you can get access to the knowledge graph API. You can get, you know, access to a lot of the, you know, the data. Actually, it's a great follow-up question is, can you tell kind of the audience who's just getting into this, kind of, you said Wikidata, and kind of how that influences the knowledge panel, how that came from Freebase, how that came from WordNet, you know, like, you know, what's important for someone to know about Wikidata, the taxonomies and knowledge panel, knowledge graph?
Right. Well, I think you know more about WordNet and Freebase than I do. But the thing, it's important to remember that Google has been training its machine learning model, the model that is learning how to understand the world, on Wikidata and Wikipedia, and previous to that, Freebase, which was ported into Wikidata and is now integrated as part of Wikidata. So they're obviously incredibly important. And up until last year, about a year and a half ago, I would have said, you know, you've got next to no chance of getting into the knowledge graph if you don't have some kind of presence in one of those databases. And interestingly enough, databases like IMDb for movies, Music Brains for music, it isn't just those, it also depends on which industry you're looking at. And if you think about IMDb, Music Brains, Wikipedia, Wikidata, we're looking at databases that have been human curated by fans, by people who are passionately interested, and have been correctly structured so that the machine can digest them natively or simply. And that means two things. One, is it structured? Two, it's been checked by humans. So Google has said, right, I'm going to train the machine on this. Google Books is another example. And it's trained its machine on these human curated data sets for years and years and years and years and years. And it's let the machine loose. And the machine is now hobbling around I was going to say, no, it's not hobbling, it's scooting. It's running around the world, collecting all this data, and it's trying to decide, according to what it's learned from these human curated sources, what is true and what is not true. And that's kind of the key. And that's where I think this gets into the most interesting rabbit hole of the lot, is trying to figure out how we can educate this machine. If you take Wikipedia as being the headmaster at the school,
right,
that the child believes every single word that comes out of his mouth or her mouth. Wikidata is the teacher, whatever it might be. This analogy probably won't fly very far. But now we're looking to say, let's get the postman involved in this, and let's get the policeman from down the road, and let's get the lady who I don't know, the lady who comes around every day to deliver food, or I'm trying to think of example. Oh, grandma. Let's get grandma involved. All of these people who the child can potentially trust.
Right.
Let's get them all involved, and let's stop focusing on school. Oh, I like that. That's suddenly
good. It's a pretty solid analogy. I think the one, it kind of goes along with some advice that I typically will give for Wikipedia, and I love yours. It's like, don't just go try to make your page, right? Because there's not a great chance of that working on its own. It needs to have additional reference sources. So it's researching where on Wikipedia should your brand, should your entities be mentioned logically? Where would it make sense for you to be? And if maybe there's a list, maybe you are a brand and you are one of X things in a state or in a United States, and there's a list of things. Maybe you should be in that list. It's how many ways can you get your presence or your entity logically mentioned? Because then that starts to escort you to deserving a page of your own. Don't just pop the page on and expect it to work. So, and that's the same concept as organic search, right? It's how natural would it be for someone stumbling through the web to land on your web page? That was the origin of PageRank, right? And so this is not terribly different if you think about it, in that you've got to build the foundation to be able to win that notoriety or win that space. So I love that way that you described that.
I think it's really important to point out that some brands and some people will never deserve a Wikipedia page. Right. Some people and some brands are just not going to be spontaneously searched by other people. We're all the stars of our own films, but don't make the mistake to think that, your mother thinks you're great, but that's about it. And that's true for most of us in the world. Being notable enough to have a Wikipedia page is something you may never attain. And Rand Fishkin made a very good point. He had his Wikipedia article deleted because he basically said, if you want to ask somebody, a Wikipedia editor, what did Captain Kirk say in the 25th minute of the 4th episode of the 26th series of Star Trek, you can bet your bottom dollar they're going to get that right. If you ask them who founded Moz, they're going to get it wrong. You don't want these third parties over whom you have absolutely no control and who don't necessarily know what they're talking about, managing your message, your story. And I agree with him. I mean, I had 3 Wikipedia pages, one for me, one for the Blue Dog and Yellow Koala, and one for my punk folk group. And they all got deleted within 2 weeks last year in the summer. And in truth, the biggest hit I took was my ego. In terms of knowledge graph presence, I can tell that story another day, but the Blue Dog and Yellow Koala and the punk group went from strength to strength without Wikipedia, and I managed to get my description from my site into the knowledge panel.
Yep. Well, so I do want to get into a little bit about the koala examples because one of them I find it to be very eye-opening for someone diving in here.
Okay.
But we did have a few questions that before I get to my next question, and I think that they relate to what you just said. And I'm not gonna, so Dieter, if you wanna go into the Ask Me Anything and ask your specific question about your brand and kind of specific steps for it, that's the best place for that. You can see it on my screen, but I'm gonna ask it in the abstract. If my brand or the name of my business is kind of not it's a collection of effectively words. It's not necessarily a thing that no one has ever said before. It's not a Uber. It's not something like that. It's not
It's a
Yahoo.
keyword stuff brand name.
Exactly. It's that I am blue microphone person. Like for some reason it's something like that. What is my strategy for Brand SERP if the words that are the collection of my brand aren't effectively unique? Does it differ? How do I go about doing that? And the other question is, if I'm only, and this is from MH, if I'm only a website and not a physical business, I wouldn't have a phone number. Is this even relevant for me? Can I control this? I think these two questions go along with one another because one tells the story that maybe I haven't done enough foundational work, and one tells the story of I just haven't earned it yet, baby. So.
Well, the first question is the keyword stuffed name. 10, 15, 20 years ago, that was a really good idea. Now it's a really bad idea.
Right.
That ambiguity creates enormous problems, and brand SERPs are nigh on impossible to control when you have that kind of ambiguity. You need to work on it much, much, much harder than anybody else. If you have a unique name like Uber, you build, and I like unique names simply because it allows you to build the message that's understood intuitively by people. It's harder to do from the get-go.
Right.
But it gives you control of the message and it gives you control of your brand SERP very quickly. Dave Davis from Uhulu called his company Uhulu, which is very difficult to say, but he got control of his brand SERP very quickly because it's unique.
Right.
So the passion and the fad or the trend for keyword heavy brand names is now fiercely backfiring on people in this particular context. I mean, there are companies called Yellow Door. Foolish mistake from every point of view. That's even worse than Blue Microphone Man. If I might say so. Sorry, Jeff.
I'm looking at a blue microphone, so you know what I'm talking
I
about.
was about to say that I had a conversation with Dixon Jones, and we were trying to find examples, and we were at Brighton, and he looked out the window and he said, "Piers in Ethiopia." And you're going, okay, you just looked out the window and saw piers. You looked over there and saw a picture of Ethiopia. Bob's your uncle. You've got your example. But we're all like that. Our lack of imagination is astonishing. And for the blue dog, yellow koala, we used to look out the window and say, let's do an episode about mountains, because there happened to be a mountain opposite where we were sitting.
Let's take a tangent before we answer the other question, though. Tell us a little bit about blue dog and yellow koala, and that is a children's show, entity, songs, like everything. And how did you marry that with Brand SERP? And like what is I love this one component of it, which I'll get to if you don't, but yeah, tell us about how you've used that to learn about Brand SERP.
Right, well, the blue dog and yellow koala is actually two cartoon characters that I created with my wife. I was a blue dog, she was a yellow koala. We had, in 2007, we had a website. It was games and songs and animations, and it got 5 million visits a month and 100 million page views a month, which actually makes over 1 billion page views in a year, which is stunning. And that was in Mauritius, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, on this kind of desert island. It was very, very strange. And we also did a TV series for ITV International that aired in 25 countries. And it was actually very successful at the time. And I left that behind me 12 years ago now. And thought, yeah, okay, very long story, but I realized last year when I started working on knowledge panels that I had an immense opportunity to test. So what I then did is, if you typed into Google at the time, a year ago, in fact, it was less than that, it's 9 months, Daddy Koala, who was the father of the yellow koala that my wife played. So the character's called Buwa and Koala. Buwa has a family, mother Mawa, father Dawa, sister Siwa. Genius naming convention. The koala, Koala, who was a yellow koala for reasons absolutely unknown and I can't explain, had a father called Daddy Koala, a mother called Mummy Koala, grandfather called Grandpa Koala, and a grandma called Grandma Koala. And what I decided to do was build the family tree in Google's brain. So now if you type Daddy Koala into Google, it will show you a yellow koala in a garden. He's a gardener, that's his kind of special role in the TV series, with his name, fictional character, a description taken from my site, and then it says significant other Mummy Koala, which I love. I think that's just so cool.
That's my favorite part, by the way. My favorite part by far.
And then if you click on Mummy Koala, it shows a female yellow koala with significant other Daddy Koala. And if you go to Grandpa Koala, it says significant other Grandma Koala, and you can guess the last one. And what was really interesting about that is I used WordLift on my WordPress site to build the internal knowledge graph, which describes, we've got a silo that describes Buwa Koala and their families, their albums, their music, their songs, the TV series, all the episodes of the TV series. And you can see it gets very complicated in terms of entities very quickly, because right there you've got 9 characters, you've got a website, you've got a TV series of 52 episodes, you've got 112 songs, and in those songs you have people who perform. So you've got the characters, and then you take it a step back and you say, who sang the song Buwa and Koala? And it's Jason Barnard and Brunick Barnard. Who sang the song Big Fat Tum? My daughter, Leonor Barnard, participated in that one. So you've got entities behind the entities, and you can see how quickly this tree grows out and how complex it gets very, 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 very quickly. And you can look up the songs, you can look up the characters, you can look up who did the voice for Buwa, who did the voice for Koala, who did the voice for Daddy Koala, Grandpa Koala, and Google will come up with an answer for all of them simply because I have educated it. It didn't get there on its own. Right. I made it understand. So you've got this amazing family tree, and it's a really good laugh. And what I like about it is it's a fun endeavor.
Right. But you're describing that everyone needs to take their entities and build their family tree and build their education modules so that they can put themselves in the best possible place, so that anytime they get associated with knowledge panels, with SERP features, that education basis, that foundation is informing all those possible wins and all those possible control and all that possible authority. And that's key to this discussion. It's, you've got to do the work. You got to put the foundation. You got to lay the bricks. And the brick is that Daddy Koala is, the significant other of Mommy Koala.
Yeah, and you mentioned SERP features. More and more SERP features are being driven by the knowledge graph. You mentioned EAT, expertise, authority, and trust. If Google is to, or if the machines are to understand, are you an expert or authority and trustworthy, it needs to understand who you are to start with. And then you move on from there, and you say, I need to build an internal knowledge graph that I then communicate. And here we've got to Google, but you've also got to Apple, who are building their own search engine, apparently, to Microsoft, to Amazon, to Facebook, to all of these big corporations, all of these machines who are trying to understand the world because they want to understand the world to better serve their clients. And if you create your own internal knowledge graph, you can then control what you communicate, how you communicate, and what facts, in inverted commas, get out there, what they get their little paws on, because we're talking about koalas and dogs. We're going to talk about getting their paws on this stuff. And I think it's really important to say this is phenomenally boring work. It's going out there doing your naps. If you're in local search, it's all about naps. It's all about that consistency. It's all about placing the information. It's about getting the press. You don't need the links, and links are a great kind of sidekick from this, because by building that presence, you end up building links despite yourself. By building that corroboration, you build mentions despite yourself. You build authority despite yourself, and it's actually, you realize that you're building out this expertise, authority, and trust without actually even trying. But it's just really, really, really boring work. And the idea of Kalicube Pro is to make that work I can't make it less boring because it's always going to be boring, but I can at least make it quicker and less painful.
Nice, nice. So two questions that lay into that. It's to say, is schema involved in any of this? Should I be doing something with, behind the scenes markup? Second question is, what sort of information would be relevant for me to put on my sites, my entity's home if I'm not a physical business? So that's two different questions, but I think the first one is schema relevant to all this?
Schema is phenomenally important. I mean, I like to say that schema markup is Google's native language. Basically, you're communicating the content of any given page, and it's any page, in a language that Google can natively digest. Yep. What you're doing is confirming what it's already probably understood in the page, and what you're then doing is just increasing the confidence it has in its understanding of what's in that page. Mm-hmm. Then schema markup is incredibly important because it's explicit. It's explicitly stating in Google's native language exactly what you're saying in a page about yourself, who you are, what you do, who your audience is. And then schema markup also allows you the URL and the same as parameters to point to signposts to all the corroboration there is around the web and prove to it that what you're saying is true. So schema markup is a fundamental part, and a lot of people make the mistake of thinking it's the only part. They think, some people have said, all Jason does is place schema markup on his site, and Bob's your uncle, bingo, it's all there. And he's saying there's an awful lot of work behind, which is, as I said, deadly dull, but incredibly important. And without it, you will get nowhere.
I agree. I mean, it's gotta be part of the message, that's part of your ammunition. Why wouldn't you do it? Someone make the case for not using it. That's what I always challenge when they're saying, like, is schema important? It's like, why wouldn't you just set the deck in your favor as much as you possibly can?
Right. Yeah. And kind of, if you look the about us page, what typically happens, and this really annoys me, is it starts off, we were founded in 1959 by Bob Thingy and Mabel what's her face. Mm-hmm. And then they go through the entire story, and what they're currently doing is right at the bottom of the page and apparently the least important. And it should be the other way around. Mm-hmm. You should say who you are and what you do today. And the fact that it was founded by two people is important information, but it's not important information either for users when they start reading that page. They want to know who you are and why they should trust you.
Right.
And also Google, exactly the same. It's not interested in what it wants to understand the history, but that isn't the principal aim today, to understand when you were founded. The principal aim today is to understand, are you a suitable solution for its users? That's point number one, which really annoys me. But let's say Google's understood your page and it's got 20% confidence. These figures are completely made up. I mean, I've got no idea. And it says, oh, I'm 20% confident. You add schema markup, you're explicitly saying in its native language exactly what it's just understood. So it's going, now I'm 50% confidence. And that's a big jump. However much it is, it probably isn't that number, but it's definitely a big jump because it's explicit in native language Google. Then you corroborate on third-party trusted sources, point to it, signpost, and it becomes 80, 90, 95% sure of what it's understood.
Right on. I know. I mean, I
so
think
simple. Sorry.
But I think with the schema, and you described it. I love the example of at the bottom of the page is CaliCube is a thing for Brand SERP, right? And the history is there. But what you're basically describing is really the answer to the question, which is what should be on that page. It's you have to understand that your brand's exact match is an intent fractured query. If someone types in that word, there's a lot of things they could be looking for. They could be looking for your history, but that's explicit intent. CaliCube history, that's explicit, but just CaliCube is fractured. So you've got to provide that About Us page that touches on all the possible intents that user might be looking for, so that you can have all your bases covered and know which ones are most important for that intent and which ones are only secondarily important. And that's where you see people building out these misguided long form About Us pages that cover alternatives, reviews, because they think they're doing their intent research and they're listing all the variants in that page. That's not the right answer either. So no, I thought that was a really good example.
There are, sorry, two things to add there. Excuse me, I do interrupt a lot. I do know that.
It.
But the first thing is that the brand search today, the intent is normally what's happening today. So we're back into this idea of your first intent is going to be, who are you, what do you do today? And one of the reasons I know this is because my initial approach was say, I used to be a famous rock musician, I used to be a blue dog, and Google just covered my brand SERP with this information, and nobody would sign contracts with me because I didn't look like a credible digital marketer. And I then realized, I want to present what I am today. I'm terribly proud. My ego is blown out of all proportions by what I used to do. But it isn't interesting today, either for the people who are looking for me or for Google or for me, in fact, in terms of promoting my own brand or my own career. And if somebody wants to know about the blue dog and the yellow koala, they will say Jason Barnard, blue dog, Jason Barnard, boo-wah. And that has more intent. But by default, people are looking for me today. And I think that's really important to bear in mind. And I remember one of the questions from before, so I'm going to answer it, which I find kind of intriguing, saying we're just a website and there's no company behind it.
Right.
There is somebody behind it.
Right.
There's some entity behind it. It just didn't appear out of nowhere. You might be a person who's built a website who has no company, but you're still the person behind the website who's responsible. About me page, very important. Google needs to know who's behind the website. People who are visiting your site need to know who's behind the website. I mean, Search Engine Journal is a great example. Their knowledge panel says blog. Search Engine Journal is a blog, that's fine, but there is also a company behind it. That deserves another knowledge panel, and you don't want to confuse them. It's two different entities. Search Engine Journal, the website, Search Engine Journal, whatever the company's called behind it, is a different entity. And I'll give you another example, which is terribly difficult for people to get their heads around when they work in the company. It's naming your product after your company. And SE ranking, for example, I'm working with them on their brand SERPs. SE ranking is the software, SE ranking is also the name of the company.
Right.
That's terribly ambiguous, and they deserve, or they need, two knowledge panels that distinctly identify SE ranking limited created or creates or manages the software SE ranking. Right. And if you look around online, there is confusion in all the references to both, is that it's never clear which one they're talking about, and Google can't get a grip on it. So what we just need to do, and this is what we're in the process of doing, go around and make sure that the profile pages that are about the company explicitly talk about the company as the creator of the software and not the software directly. Because Google can't get its head around multiple entities on a page. You can't expect Google to understand. If you have a page and you say, here's the company, here's the software, here's the boss, here's the other boss, that's 4 entities. Google's going, I don't understand anymore. I need one page to represent one entity. Your entity home has to be the home of only that entity. And I think I might have, oh, there you go. Is that the end of it?
No, well, we got a few more minutes, but I did want to just give you some details. I had a few people ask where can they find you, where can they get some feedback, but also we're going to continue in the AMA. The bit.ly link was on this screen a couple ago, but it's bit.ly/CSCAMA. If you're not in the Content Strategy Collective community yet, jump in there. There's a lot of questions. There's a great one from Rick, which I can't get into because it will take us 15 minutes. So please jump in there and we'll answer it.
Brilliant.
But yes, please go check out Jason M. Barnard, active on LinkedIn as well. I'm Jeffrey_Coyle/Jeff Coyle. One thing just to put a note on it is to say, thank you obviously for everything that you've shared with us, but it's also it adds so many layers. And when you said you're just a website, but you're not, you're a person, you're an entity, you are an entity, and you may not be able to publish a website much longer if you're not telling people who you are and why you're credible, especially if you're influencing purchase decisions or influencing health or influencing well-being. So you really got to focus on this. And Jason, thank you so much. I'm excited to see what really explicit deep dive questions jump into the AMA, but we are out of time. Calicube, sign up, and we've got a webinar specific coupon code for our self-serve offerings, MM Webinar 15. Anything last words before we jump in the AMA?
Yeah, I do thank you for being so incredibly polite in the way that you told me to stop talking by flashing up the big thank you screen at the end, which was probably the most polite shut up I've ever had.
Oh,
So
that's
you've made
awesome.
my day. Thank you.
Well, I will also, you named a bunch of things, and we've got like a minute, so I'm just gonna rattle them off. Andrea Volpini, Word Lift, go check that out. Aleda Solis, everything she writes is amazing, and she's got an amazing newsletter. Dixon Jones, everything he writes is amazing. Search Engine Journal, Search Engine Land. I mean, you basically just dropped somebody's like stay on top of the SEO industry list right there. So we'll also include those in the show notes. And so that was a fun little footnote. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'll drop one more name while I can. Jono Alderson, who's the person who actually said one entity per page, if you want Google to understand. I think Jono Alderson is stunningly intelligent and an incredibly nice guy.
He is, his presence online is that of someone who really knows his stuff. In person, he's just a lovely person, kind of separate, but also it's just, he's got a lot of answers. He's definitely
Yeah.
an interesting person from Yoast. So awesome. This has been
Well, I
great.
had him on my podcast twice, and now if you want to go and listen to my podcast, I
Go do
highly
that.
recommend listening to my conversations with Jono because he is stunningly intelligent, and he knows so much about all this stuff. And we talk about schema mark, and we talk about entities, and they're really fun conversations, well worth listening to.
I'll throw a grenade at the end. He did say technical SEO is solved, and I don't agree. All right. See you guys later.
Ah.
Bye. Cheers.